What's up and welcome back to Interpreting the Stars with my preparation marathon for the Conjuring series of films. And now I'm on to my personal favorite film in the first two movies. It's The Conjuring 2. The Conjuring 2 takes us to Enfield, to a haunted house many consider to be the Amityville of London, as an old man named Bill Wilkins haunts a family and the Warrens must investigate, only to discover there's more at stake here than just a simple haunting, as the Warrens accidentally carried over the spirit of a demonic nun that has attached itself to Lorraine when they were recently investigating the Amityville house. Man, I gotta tell you something. When I first saw this movie, I had to be in the right state of mind or something because it downright scared me out of my britches, which, that's a rarity. Only one film had scared me before I saw this one, and that was Paranormal Activity. And every time that I see that film, I still somewhat get scared, even though I know what's coming. But can I say the same about The Conjuring 2, given this is my second viewing of it? Not quite. I still think it's really spooky and has some incredibly planned out horror sequences, but it's not quite as effective as it once was for me. Still miles better than the first film in my opinion, but not quite as immediately impressive. And a big reason for that comes right down to how illogical some things are in this one. And I'll get to that in just a hot second! First, let's talk about some of the positives in this film. Just like the first, this movie is made incredibly well, all because of the directing style of James Wan, who knows how to pace horror films perfectly. This film has a lot of tenseness because it doesn't want to just throw jump scares out at you. It prefers to build it all up organically. The Warrens don't even step a foot into this Enfield house for like an hour because it takes its sweet time introducing this family and what's going on in the house. Now, if you recall with my review of the first film, I had mentioned that a ton of stereotypes are thrown in your face immediately, and they just keep coming and coming and coming in. This is paced so much better than that first film, and the things that happen feel much more original and unique than pretty much anything that occurred in the 2013 film. I also cared a lot more about these characters than those of the first. I even thought Patrick Wilson did a better job here, and he wasn't overdoing it like he did in the first. I still don't love him as an actor. Not by a long shot, but he was much more acceptable in part 2. Also, the production design of this film is much better than the first film as it begins in the Amityville house. And it made me want to see James Wan make an Amityville film. They did such a remarkable job making the interior of the house look like the real thing. Also, the character design and creation, specifically with the nun and the crooked man, and heck, you know what, even Bill Wilkins himself, were all incredible and difficult to forget. I also think the story of what's going on in the house is much more compelling than the crap in the first film. Now, when it comes down to the negatives for The Conjuring 2, I think the biggest downfall is that I didn't consider it to be as scary as it once was for me, and I think a big part of that has to do with the fact that I knew what was coming when the first time around I didn't. The buildup was still there and everything was still pretty creepy in general, but when you already know what's coming, some of those moments that had me crouched in a corner at one point no longer worked because it no longer used the element of surprise to scare me, which was problematic for repeat viewings. Also, the logic behind a few things are kind of dumb. The inclusion of the nun and the crooked man, as crazy memorable and as cool as they are, didn't make sense in connection to the Enfield haunting, nor was it really explained that much at all. They tried to connect the nun to the Enfield haunting in a way, but even so, that didn't make a lot of sense either because the nun ended up there because she sort of tagged along with Lorraine. I don't want to spoil you on how she's connected to the story in general, but once you figure it out and you think about it for a second, it doesn't make a lot of logical sense for her to be connected to the haunting whatsoever. It was almost like a cheap excuse that they expected people to just take at face value just for the sake of showing you terrifying creatures. Let's take a look at my final score. From an unbiased technical perspective, I think as a whole, the film was made better than the first. There's an air of professionality to it where I feel like the first felt a little bit more amateur. Plus, the lack of Annabelle definitely automatically made this movie better anyways. I also think the inclusion of the nun and the crooked man, as disconnected to the story as they were, still gave the film a lot of possibilities for the future, and I'm still waiting for my crooked man spin-off film. This score is 76%. My bias score, or how I felt about the film in general, is a little bit higher because I still think it's a lot better than the first film. I still think it's spookier, even if it's not as scary as I felt like it once was. And I still think, at the very least, The Nun is one of the most terrifying looking villains I've ever seen in a horror film. This score is 82%, and when we average out the two scores together, we come to the final rating of 79%, 79 out of 100 possible stars, or a C+ letter grade. This score is quite a bit lower than I once had it, since it's not as good as I once thought it was. However, there's still plenty to appreciate while sitting back for a good scare. Take that as you will, and let me know your thoughts on The Conjuring 2 in the comments section down below. And as for YouTube, you guys know what to do. Hit that like, subscribe button, and bell to be notified when I come out with my next review, which may possibly be Conjuring 3. Maybe not. I should have that out soon, though. And until then, peace out!
Dave examines movies we just watch for fun. Davey is the expert. He is the #1 critic that I go to when I need a movie pick. Thanks for joining up with us. We think you're great.